My name's Adele Jackson. I'm one of the curators at Canterbury Museum. I'm a human history curator and I work across the collection, but I do have a particular interest in Antarctic arts and cultural history. And I have to say, I'm truly delighted to be invited to present this talk about Dr. Edward Wilson, because it brings together my two passions, which are Antarctica and visual arts. And I first came across Wilson's artwork at the Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge in the UK, and this was about, well, close to 20 years ago now. And this was when I was first starting out on doing some research into the history of visual artists working in Antarctica. And then when I came to work at Canterbury Museum, which is about 2 years ago now, I was really curious to find out what Antarctic artwork was in the collection. And I was absolutely thrilled to find this item. And this is one of Edward Wilson's original paint boxes. And the museum also holds some of his original drawings and paintings. So it's a real thrill to see those. And although in the collection these are quite few in number, in comparison to the extensive collections at the Scott Polar Research Institute and the Wilson Contemporary Museum and Art Gallery in Cheltenham, which is Wilson's hometown, nevertheless the pieces in Canterbury Museum are really significant. And I've been working to match these pieces that we hold with Wilson's biography and his expedition diaries. So today I'm going to share some of initial reflections from that research. And you might notice that I've just changed the title very slightly. So when I gave the title to Jean, it was quite some time ago, and then I've done some research, and I think, you know, you'll find out, it'll become clear why I've changed the title from Norway to Switzerland. For Antarctic enthusiasts in the audience today, you will know that Dr. Edward Adrian Wilson was, as Jean said, a physician, a naturalist and an artist. He journeyed south twice with both of Scott's Antarctic expeditions, the first being the Discovery expedition of 1901 to 04, and on the second he was appointed chief scientist with the Terra expedition, which ran from 1910 to 13. And Wilson was a member of Scott's Southern Party and the South Pole Party on both of these expeditions. So sadly, he tragically died alongside Scott on the return journey after reaching the South Pole in January 1912. And Wilson is a significant figure in the history of Antarctic exploration and also within the history of Antarctic art. And significantly, his work remains an inspiration to contemporary Antarctic visual artists, a few of whom I've noted on the slide there. So before looking at some examples of his work, just very briefly, I'd like to place Wilson's work as an expedition artist in a historical context. There is a long history of visual artists working in the far south, dating back to the 18th century, when the first images of the south were recorded below the Antarctic Circle. And on these expeditions, visual art served many purposes. Detailed visual records of animals and plants supported Western scientific investigations and also identified species for economic exploitation. And coastal profiles aided future navigation, and the naming of landscape features also supported claims of discovery and sovereignty. Visual records were so important that as part of their education, naval officers were trained in observational drawing and painting, and all of this visual material supported the underlying agendas of imperialism and colonization. Printing technologies allowed images to be included in expedition reports and published in newspapers, and this garnered political, financial and public support. And despite the invention of photography in the 19th century, a role for an artist who could draw and paint continued well into the 20th century. During Wilson's lifetime, photography was limited to black and white, so the ability to record colour and detail, which is one of the things that Wilson is known for, was an extremely valuable asset. Wilson was a prolific image maker, and when you read his Antarctic diaries, it's clear that drawing and painting was pretty much an everyday activity, and it was central to his scientific studies, as well as recording expedition experiences and events. The volume and range of his work that he produced is truly outstanding. And this book, Edward Wilson's Antarctic Notebooks, it gives a sense of this diversity of his work. From an early age, Wilson had a love of nature and of drawing. He loved nature walks with his father, and he started his own natural history collection at the age of 9, and he often sketched and painted the things that he collected. He read natural sciences at Cambridge, where he also developed his strong ascetic Christian faith, and he also met his future wife, Oriana Super, or Ori as she preferred to be called, at the time when he was studying for his medical degree at London while he was simultaneously working in the slums of Battersea. His family motto was res non verba, and for Latin speakers in the audience, you'll know that that means things or actions, not words. So it's perhaps not surprising that in his view, a short life with hard work is so much more preferable to a long one with comfort. Christian faith and his Christian faith and his character translated into a real depth of care and dedication to every aspect of his life and work. And in London, where he was studying for his medical degree and working in Battersea, this grueling work ethic really had a significant impact on his health. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, and the treatment for that disease was a period of convalescence in a cold, dry climate. So between the summer of 1898 through to the autumn of 1899, he spent time in the north of Norway, then in the Swiss Alps, and then returned to Norway for a second summer. And you can imagine the thought of a kind of enforced rest wasn't very appealing to a very active man. So wherever he could, he escaped into the mountains to paint and build his natural history collection. So it took him quite a long time to recover from TB because of that. And he was also a keen smoker at that time, which wouldn't have helped. But this painting you see on screen is the earliest original painting of Wilson's that we have in the collection. And this is a watercolour painted in Switzerland, hence the change of name of the lecture title. And it's interesting, I think it's really interesting to have these pre-Antarctic artworks in the collection, because it was during his convalescence that Wilson spent time honing his watercolour skills. And some of the features for which Wilson's work is known appear in these watercolours. So in this one, I hope you can see with this light, but I'd just like to draw your attention to the subtlety of the sky. So it's a very, very pale blue, and it kind of very gradually blends out to the edges there. And this subtlety of colouring was one of Wilson's real skills. Just to give you an idea of Wilson's dedication to his art and his interest in nature, in Norway, to capture the best light conditions, he developed a routine of sleeping in the afternoons, leaving the house after dinner, and returning home by 3 a.m. And this was his daily life. And his biographer, George Seaver, writes, his sketches were produced under tests of endurance, wrapped to the eyes in scarves and in a cloud of tobacco smoke, his fingers swollen with insect bites. He often painted in small pocket-sized sketchbooks, and these paintings that you see are about the size of my hand. And Seaver writes that these are exquisite miniatures, little gems of colour, brilliant studies displaying unmistakable genius. Wilson greatly admired the work of William Turner, the great landscape artist, or seascape artist even, and who was renowned for very dramatic skies. And this influence can be seen in Wilson's watercolour sketches, where the sky is very much the focus in his mountain scenes. But he wasn't always satisfied with his results, and in a letter home he wrote, "Last night there were showers of rain flying about. The whole heaven was a rosy orange blaze, and one of the mountains caught the light and was flooded with brilliant scarlet. I covered 7 bits of paper with red, orange and purple paint, but oh, they're so ghastly and insufficient." So yeah, he was really trying to hone his abilities to reflect on the page what he could see with his own eyes. So this painting of the coastline of Norway, I think this may be one of the last he painted during his time in Norway. It's dated August, and he travelled back to the UK in August. And so this might have even been painted from the deck of the ship as he departed. And this is where really his compass shifted from north to south, because after he returned to the UK in 1999, he soon found out about the opportunity with Scott's first expedition. He did try to return to work in London, but he quickly became ill again, so he went home to Cheltenham. And there he got engaged to Ori. He qualified in medicine, and he was appointed a junior house surgeon at Cheltenham Hospital. So he was made aware of Scott's discovery expedition and an opening for a junior surgeon and a zoologist. And through his family and work colleagues and his connections, he was recommended to the Royal Geographical Society as a good candidate. He met with Scott, and Scott was hugely impressed with Wilson's character and his range of skills as a doctor, as a scientist, and as an artist. And Wilson was asked to design the crest for the expedition, crockery, and letterhead. He had to undergo a medical examination, and this showed that the TB had cleared, but there were some scars on his lungs. Scott was so determined that Wilson be hired, but only if he agreed to come at his own risk. And if you consider Antarctica is the coldest and driest climate, it's not pretty good for Wilson's lungs, Wilson noted, "If the climate suits me, I shall come back more fit for work than ever. Whereas, if it doesn't, I think there's no fear of my coming back at all. I quite realise that it is kill or cure. I have made up my mind, it shall be cure." He married Ori 3 days after his interview with the Admiralty and just 3 weeks before setting sail for the Antarctic. And this is an original watercolour, and it's a sketch from the Discovery Expedition, and Wilson painted it on the 11th of April 1902. He he conscientiously noted the date and time and location on almost all of his sketches, so these can be very accurately matched with his diary entries. And he notes on the 11th of April that he went out for a walk with Ernest Shackleton after working on the South Polar Times, which was a kind of periodical or journal or magazine that they produced over the winters. And he then spent the evening painting. What he hasn't mentioned in the diary, though, is a detail. I'm quite surprised it's not mentioned because it's a detail that I think is one of the most interesting about this painting. And that is that it shows a Fata Morgana mirage on the horizon. So Fata Morgana is a complex optical phenomenon. I can't even begin or hope to explain how they're made. But one of the effects of these is an inversion of an object and an object appearing to hover in a band of colour above the horizon, and Wilson has clearly depicted that. So I was quite surprised not to see that noted in his diary. One of Wilson's duties in Antarctica was to draw coastal profiles. The museum holds a complete set of the original lithographic reproductions of his panoramic drawings, produced as part of the expedition report. And if you look closely on the map on the left, you'll see some red text, and that indicates all the locations that Wilson drew one of these panoramas. And it's a testament to Wilson's skill that these drawings have been proven to be extremely accurate when compared with the results of more sophisticated survey techniques. Some of the drawings were made on the journey south, and some were made on the overland attempt to reach the farthest south. Wilson and Shackleton got along very well with each other, but they also both got along very well with Scott, which is one of the reasons why Scott chose them for his Southern Party teammates. Interestingly, when they came back from their southern journey, Scott was closer friends with Wilson than he was with Shackleton, but I'll leave that to speculation of what happened along the way. But they did start out as three very close friends. And the traverse south was the first time the interior of Antarctica had been substantially explored. But disaster struck for Wilson. 2 months into the march, he came down with excruciating snow blindness, and on Christmas Eve, he treated himself with cocaine eye drops, which gave him some temporary relief. But on the 27th, he was skiing completely blindfolded. However, charting the land was his responsibility, and that evening, a new mountain range came into view. So he skied completely blindfolded for a second day, and the vision in his left eye was completely blurred. So he sketched this scene of the furthest south mountains that they saw with just one eye. And so this is a pencil sketch which is in the museum's collection, and it's the team's furthest south position on that expedition. And in total, Wilson charted 300 miles of coastline of mountain ranges that had never been seen before. This painting of a bird specimen study was done on the journey north, away from Antarctica back to New Zealand, when the ship anchored at the Auckland Islands for 2 weeks in March 1904. And here Wilson spent time primarily collecting, skinning, drawing and painting bird specimens, as well as some seals. And although Wilson spent a lot of time shooting birds to collect them, this is also contrasted with the affectionate way he writes about them in his journal. The bird that we see here is a quail falcon, and he wrote about his joy being nearly complete when he first heard and then saw the little falcon. Another bird that captured Wilson's imagination was the emperor penguin. So on the ship voyage down to Antarctica, he'd spotted a colony at Cape Crozier on Ross Island, and he was determined to make a trip to collect bird and egg specimens before leaving Antarctica. And the image that you see here is one of these eggs that he collected. It's in Canterbury Museum's collection. It was collected by Wilson himself on the 13th of September 1913. And his diary entry for this day describes the difficult terrain that had to be navigated to get to the colony. However, because of the timing of the bird's breeding cycle, he wasn't able to collect a specimen at the embryonic stage, and I believe he hypothesized that this would answer some questions on evolution. So 5 years later, when Scott asked him if he'd join his second expedition, Wilson said that he would only agree on condition he would be allowed to make a winter traverse to Cape Crozier, to the Emperor colony, to collect one of these eggs in its embryonic stage. And this was famously to become known as the worst journey in the world. Apsley Cherry Garrard, the author of the book of the same name, and was on this journey with Wilson, wrote about Wilson. He said, It is not the strength of body, but rather the strength of will, which carries a man farther, where mind and body are taxed at the same time to their utmost limit. So although Wilson wasn't the most strongly built man, he was one of the most determined. Wilson accepted the position of chief scientist on the expedition, and on the voyage south from the UK, Wilson often spent early mornings out on deck sketching. This pencil sketch is really beautifully finished. Again, it's in the museum's collection, and this sketch was made just a few days after crossing the equator, and I just think it's an absolute real gem. I just think it's so beautiful. And another real gem is also from the Atlantic leg of the journey, and it's a watercolour painted on the morning of Wilson's 38th birthday, which I also think is a super special thing to have in the collection. And in this painting, Wilson has captured the glowing full moon in the early morning light, and he notes in his diary, he notes about painting the moon in his diary. And yeah, I just think it's great to have one of these artworks in the collection that's actually painted on his birthday. It makes it so special. But what I like about both of these artworks is that sense of sea journey and the passage to Antarctica, and it kind of creates this sense of anticipation, and it also emphasises a sense of distance, moving closer and closer to a more and more remote location. This is another original watercolour, and this time painted in Antarctica, and it's featuring one of Wilson's favourite subjects. And those of you that have been south to Ross Island, I'm sure you'll recognise this landmark immediately. This is the most southernmost active volcano, Mount Erebus. And Mount Erebus could be seen from the Cape Evans expedition hut, and Wilson returned to it as a subject matter time and time again. And he captured the mountain in various light conditions and at various states of activity. These images on screen are some of the original lithographic prints which were made from the paintings. And just as an aside really, Wilson made a huge amount of detailed studies of Erebus and the various smoke trails and cloud formations above the volcano as a complement to his records of meteorological and volcanic activity. Another favourite subject of Wilson's was light and atmospheric conditions and phenomena. And he describes these features in his diary, often in great detail, and recording their colour and their form. And I think they're some of his most evocative paintings as well. To me, he was in equal parts a scientist and an artist. And I think it shines through in the level of detail in his work, coupled with his very delicate painting style. And interestingly, his ideas of love, truth and beauty were central to his approach in both art and in science, if not in life as a whole. And he was self-taught, and he had doubts about his ability because of that. He considered himself an amateur. However, he's very, very highly regarded for his technical skill and his representational accuracy, but also for how he recorded his subject with really great sensitivity. And these qualities are echoed across all aspects of his work. His biographer said that there was indeed a perfection of refinement in his person and manner, as well as a delicacy, precision and deftness in everything he touched, whether a patient's bandage, a dried leaf or a bird's wing. And I'd like to share with you a quote from Scott about Wilson's character, and this has often been quoted, so you might have heard this before. But he said that one sees Wilson busy with pencil and colour box, rapidly and steadily adding to his portfolio of charming sketches and at intervals filling the gaps in his zoological work. always ready and willing to give advice and assistance to others at times. His sound judgment is appreciated and therefore is a constant referee. Words must fail me when I talk of Bill Wilson. I believe he really is the finest character I have ever met. The closer one gets to him, the more there is to admire. Every quality is so solid and dependable. You cannot imagine how much that counts down here. The Wilson images in the museum from the Terra expedition are early lithographic reproductions of original paintings, the originals being held in UK institutions. And these original paintings are rarely displayed because of the paint's sensitivity to light. So the watercolours are very, very prone to light damage. And because Wilson liked his work to be seen and enjoyed, many of his paintings have faded. His great-nephews write, "Pinks fade away from Uncle Ted's paintings almost so fast that you can watch them go, followed by other colours until they become drab and lifeless." And because some of these originals have faded so much, in some cases these lithographic prints are now better representations of the range of subtlety of colours which Wilson first painted. So I think we're very fortunate to have some of these lithographs in the collection. And this lithograph, it's a shame with the lights, you can't really pick out the colours. It looks so much better on my computer screen. But this lithograph is a superb example of the astonishing colour and subtlety of Wilson's work. There's a beautiful gradation of colour in the sky that goes from blue into yellow, into pink, and then down to grey. And then you might just be able to make out on the face of this iceberg, there's a green tint to the iceberg. So it's a really beautiful lithograph for that subtlety of colour. But I've left a gap at the side there because one of the real treasures of the collection is that we have the original sketch for this painting. And there it is, the original pencil sketch. Again, it's about the size of my hand. It's this small sketch. And what's wonderful about it is one of the things Wilson did was make these sketches and note. He had a wonderful colour memory, so he noted down the colours. And then later in the expedition hut, he would make the final paintings. And on this sketch, you can see down the left-hand side, he does note that change of colour. He writes, at the top is cobalt bluish grey, then ochreish to pale pink, then grey, then pink, and then back to grey. And he's even put little lines to show where the banding of the colour changes. And when you see this lithograph, you can see how accurately, you can overlay them actually and see how accurate one is to the other. So yeah, we're fortunate to have both of these in the collection to be able to compare the two. And we can also see he's noted on his sketch green on the iceberg, and again that's reflected in his painting. Wilson was selected to go south as part of the South Pole Party, along with Henry Bowers, Edgar Evans and Lawrence Oates. And they set off from Cape Evans on the 1st of November, and they reached the South Pole on the 17th of January, 1912. And there they discovered they'd arrived 5 weeks after the Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen. And a sense of despondency can perhaps be detected in the faces of the men when this photograph was taken at the South Pole. On the same day, Wilson drew some sketches that could be the last that I think he ever made, and the museum holds a print of one of these. It's an original print of the original drawing. So Wilson recorded the landmarks left by Amundsen around the South Pole, including the remains of their campsite, the snow cairn and markers, and the makeshift South Pole marker, which was a piece of black fabric lashed to an upturned sledge runner. And Wilson wrote in his diary, I made some sketches here, but it was blowing very cold, -22. At our lunch South Pole camp, we saw a sledge runner with a black flag about half a mile away. Scott sent me on ski to fetch it, and I found a note tied to it showing that it was where the Norski's actual final pole position. I was given the flag and the note with Amundsen's signature, and I got a piece of the sledge runner as well. So the original pencil drawing is in the Royal Collection in Buckingham Palace, but both Canterbury Museum and the Scott Polar Research Institute each hold one of these original prints of the drawing. And this flag not only marks the South Pole, but it also signals the final chapter of Edward Wilson's art and life. On their return march, all 5 men perished. The tent where Wilson, Bowers and Scott lay was found by a search party the following summer, and the men's journals and their personal effects, including Wilson's sketches, were gathered and returned to their families. But this isn't where I want to end the story. I'd like to finish with sharing an artwork that, although it's not in the museum's collection, it has a very close association with the museum, and it's a painting that takes us full circle back to Switzerland. So this is a watercolour of a small bird, a tree creeper, and we can tell from the date, March 1899, that this was painted in Switzerland. And this was well over a year before Antarctica was even on Wilson's horizon. So you'll remember from the start of the talk, he was recovering from tuberculosis and spending his days honing his painting skills. And this painting was found in Antarctica by a conservator working for the Antarctic Heritage Trust at the Cape Adele Historic Hut in 2016. And it was found nestled amongst other papers which had protected it for over 100 years. And at the time, the conservation team said, how the painting came to be in this hut is still something of a mystery, because Wilson was based at Cape Evans, which is a completely different part. However, various teams did visit Cape Adele. And they stopped at Cape Adele on their way down on the first expedition. So the painting could have been taken to Antarctica on either of Scott's expeditions by Wilson, but they thought that it was more likely the artwork travelled with him in 1911 and somehow made its way from Cape Evans to Cape Adele with one of the other expedition parties. Anyway, it made its way to Antarctica, and it was found, a real gem, hiding amongst those papers. And then it was brought back to Christchurch by the Antarctic Heritage Trust for conservation treatment. And it was exhibited and seen for the first time, and perhaps the only time, at the Breaking the Ice exhibition, which was hosted at Canterbury Museum. And this was in 2019. And the final thoughts that I'd just like to end with is just looking at this painting and thinking about Wilson. And for me, you could almost read this painting as a metaphor for Wilson himself, travelling from Switzerland all the way to Antarctica. It's a life stilled. It's in a state of eternal sleep, and it's on a sheet of white, which is where Wilson lay in his final resting place in Antarctica. So with that, I'll end the talk. If you do have any questions, I'll be very happy to take them. Thank you.